Public Relations. Edward L. Bernays. 1945. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 1. The Growth of Public Relations. 4. From the Dark Ages to the Modern World. 13 centuries passed between the fall of the Roman Empire in AD 475 and the Enlightenment of the 18th century. This period of recorded history may be divided into two main parts: the Dark Ages, when on the ruins of the Greco-Roman civilization the barbarian invaders were building a new civilization of their own, in which, for a long time, public opinion played little part, and the Renaissance and Reformation, wherein the basis for the modern world was laid, with its emphasis on the importance of the individual and of public opinion. The Renaissance was a secular movement that stressed the rights of reason to investigate nature and society. The Reformation was a religious movement that stressed the rights of individual conscience. Without these two movements, public relationships as we know them today would be impossible. Both awakened the people of Europe to great new possibilities. The Renaissance affected the development of public opinion by reviving the knowledge of the Greeks and Romans. It advanced the democratic idea through the liberation of the individual and the spirit. The great voyages of discovery opened America and Africa to Western civilization. A revolution in communication brought about by the invention of printing and by important developments in transportation and commerce accelerated the changes. Above all, the Renaissance freed the human mind to think for itself, to investigate, to persuade. These developments required and brought about free discussion. In turn, free discussion brought about a reliance of people and movements on new public understanding and public relationships. This was also one of the results of the Reformation. The attack on authority and the emphasis on the individual that marked the movement clarified the importance of relationships between leaders and followers and between the various groups of society. Men now developed new political theories that broke sharply with medieval thought. In the medieval period, church and state were one. The church molded public opinion, and its power and effectiveness depended on its public relations activities. All thinking in this period was basically determined by the church, which created and maintained unity among the people by spreading its ideas through preaching, painting, sculpture, song, and ritual, as well as through the power of religion itself. The church also used political and military action for its public relations purposes, as in the case of the Crusades, which rallied and united Christendom in war against the Muslims. The rise of the medieval guilds, however, introduced a new factor that developed opinion outside the church. The guilds led to the development first of small business, then of larger, more extensive enterprises. These business activities led, in turn, to an awareness of the importance of public relationships, for it became evident that business was dependent on one or more publics. Various political developments also aroused public opinion. The battle for supremacy between popes and emperors led to the formation of parties such as the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. These parties produced their public relations experts who appealed to the reading public for support. Many of the most important propagandists of the late Middle Ages and the early Renaissance were poets. Dante expressed his semi-Ghibelline views in the Divine Comedy. Petrarch wrote his famous epistles in support of the republic that Cola di Rienzi maintained for a short time in Rome. In England, the struggle between the nobility and the crown resulted in a document of the utmost importance for the development of public relations. The Magna Carta, obtained by the barons from King John in 1215, became the basis of our own Constitution and Bill of Rights. It set a foundation for permitting freedom of expression, persuasion, and differences of opinions of all kinds. A century and a half later came England's Great Revolt of 1381, led by John Wycliffe, who made the first translation of the Bible into English. Although this translation was forbidden by church and state, the English version of the Bible was widely read and helped stimulate individual thinking and opinion. Wycliffe's followers, the Lollards, spread his translation of the Bible throughout the country. They also spread his doctrines, which marked the prelude to the Reformation. In preaching reform of ecclesiastical, governmental, and social institutions, the Lollards spoke to the public wherever it could be reached in streets, squares, or gardens. And they spoke in English instead of in Latin. Despite church and government decrees forbidding such activities, the Lollards distributed books, tracts, and broadsides. These attacked the church on the ground that it owned huge landed estates, collected exorbitant tithes, and charged high fees for baptism, marriage, burial, and prayers. These public relations activities were so successful that every second man in England was a Lollard. Lollard ideas were promoted by popular ballads and poems. Chaucer mentioned the Lollards in his Canterbury Tales, and Langland preached Lollard views in his great poem, The Vision of Piers Plowman. When Luther's ideas reached England in the 16th century, Lollard re-merged with the Reformation. While the Renaissance changed Western society in the 15th and 16th centuries, the Reformation intensified that change in the 16th. The Renaissance was marked by a great revival of literature, painting, and sculpture through such masters as Cervantes, Michelangelo, and Leonardo da Vinci, the spread of science and philosophy, the growth of university education, the improvement of social standards, and the rise of the humanist scholars and writers who specialized in appealing to public opinion. The 16th century Reformation was in part a revolt of the European governments against the absolute authority of the Church. It was also in part a revolt of ideas, of private opinion opposed to ecclesiastical authority. In both Renaissance and Reformation movements that sometimes merged through the humanists, the printed word played a great role in molding opinion. Luther's translation of the Bible into German had as great an impact on opinion as Wycliffe's earlier translation of the Bible into English. And Renaissance thinkers paid considerable attention to the problem of public opinion. Machiavelli spoke of publica voce, the Italian equivalent of Rome's vox populi. The Prince, which he wrote as a handbook for rulers, set a pattern on the molding of public opinion by word and deed. A century later, Shakespeare voiced the growing awareness of the power of opinion when he had the king in Henry V speak of opinion that did help me to the crown. Shakespeare also called opinion the mistress of success. Verbal patterns of this kind acknowledge some aspects of public relations and their importance. By the 17th century, it was widely recognized not only that opinion is important but that steps may be taken to modify it in certain directions. In contest with the Reformation, the Church launched the Counter-Reformation. This was accompanied by appeals to opinion which for the first time were called propaganda. The term propaganda was introduced when Pope Gregory XIII established a committee for the propagation of the faith to found seminars and print catechisms and other religious works in foreign countries. Subsequently, Pope Urban VIII, 1623-1644, founded the College of Propaganda to educate priests. In 1650, Pope Clement VII instituted the Sacred Congregation for the propagation of the faith to spread Catholicism the world over. Public opinion played a key role in the third phase of the Reformation, the Puritan Revolution in 17th century England. Both sides in the conflict appealed to the public for support through books, tracts, and pamphlets. From 1640 to the Restoration, some 30,000 political pamphlets and newspapers were published in England. One of the great participants in this war for public opinion was John Milton, whose Paradise Lost expressed the Puritan point of view along with his pamphlets. In one of his most important pamphlets, he emphasized the importance of free opinion and made a historic plea for freedom of the press. Subsequently, John Locke in his philosophical writings stressed the need for more democratic relations between the people and authority. At the same time, the French philosopher Blaise Pascal was calling opinion the queen of the world. In general, the 17th century expanded the nomenclature of opinion molding. While the Church of Rome was establishing the terms propaganda and propagandist, the Puritan Revolution developed such terms as agitation and agitator. A most important development of this period was the rise of the newspaper. The rapid growth of commerce in the 17th century produced newsletters, which various merchant princes issued to influence public opinion. The first newsletter was published by the Fuggers, German merchants and bankers, in Augsburg in 1609. The first daily newspaper appeared in Frankfurt in 1615, the first English newspaper in 1622, and the first French newspaper, the Gazette, was founded in 1631 under the sponsorship of Cardinal Richelieu. England's Puritan Revolution greatly stimulated the growth of the press. The Moderate, one of the earliest periodicals devoted to stirring public opinion, was started in 1648. That year there also appeared in a London paper the first newspaper advertisement. All these publications provided new tools for the dissemination of ideas and for a greater participation by the public in decisions that affected them. The growth of newspapers, books, and pamphlets in England, France, and Germany widened the area in which better public relations could operate on new social, economic, political, and religious levels. In 17th century England, public opinion manifested itself in a victory over Stuart absolutism and showed rulers the need for cultivating good relationships with the public. Louis XIV of France engaged in his own type of public relations. He struck medals and sent ambassadors to various countries to enhance French prestige. Books, novels, tracts, and newspapers were not the only media of communication at this time. Public opinion increased in importance during the 17th century with the rise of two new places of assembly, the French salon and the English coffeehouse. The salon developed so rapidly that by the middle of the 18th century it is said to have governed French public opinion more than the royal court. And by the 18th century, London had more than 2,000 coffeehouses where politicians, writers, and citizens in all walks of life met to exchange ideas. Germany developed neither the salon nor the coffeehouse, but its language orders in the 17th century, and its moral and patriotic societies in the 18th, were focal points of opinion which leaders recognized for public relations purposes. Another stimulating factor in the growth of opinion was the development of reading groups, circulating libraries, and second-hand bookstores. The subscription library, initiated in the American colonies in 1732 by Benjamin Franklin, spread rapidly to Europe. Of great importance for the development of public opinion was the publication of budget proposals by the English government in 1688. Since the carrying out of the budget depended on taxation of the people, the budget was submitted for authorization to Parliament and made available to the public. Discussions of the budget by the people's elected representatives and by the public at large emphasized the importance of opinion. In the 18th century, French political philosophers demanded that their government follow the English example of publishing budget proposals. To ensure favorable public reception, this was finally done in 1789, at the start of the French Revolution. Growth of public opinion in the 17th and 18th centuries led to the abolition of censorship, which in turn made free public discussion possible and produced greater reliance by leaders on their public relationships. England abolished press licensing in 1695, France in 1789 at the outbreak of the Revolution. And in 1791, the United States established freedom of speech, press, and assembly in the Bill of Rights. Many factors had contributed to the expansion of public opinion, among them the rapid development of commerce, the rise of the middle class to power, the spread of literacy and reading. The abolition of censorship reflected these trends and recognized how important public opinion was for government. Because of the spread of opinion and the discussion that marked it, the 18th century has been called the Age of Enlightenment. It was then that, for the first time in history, the significant phrase public opinion was used. This coinage showed that leaders were more aware of the need to integrate themselves with their publics. So did a term that Rousseau invented to express the impact of public opinion, volonté générale, or the general will. The Germans adopted the phrase and called it Volksgeist, or spirit of the people. In this same age, Jeremy Bentham demanded full publicity for all official acts of government so that the tribunal of public opinion could prevent misrule. Like the Renaissance and the Reformation, the Enlightenment was a period of great change marked by the clash of old and new ideas. In this battle for opinion, thinkers and pamphleteers like Montesquieu, Voltaire, Turgot, Rousseau, Diderot, Condorcet, and others promulgated more democratic ideas and advanced the awareness of public relationships. These philosophers conducted propaganda against the status quo. In the name of reason, they attacked old religious, political, economic, and social institutions and called for reform all along the line. In this way they prepared public opinion for the French Revolution, which in turn carried on intensive propaganda for its ideas throughout Europe. The French Revolution, which opened with the storming of the Bastille in 1789 and ended with Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815, gave the term public opinion currency throughout Europe and the Americas. William Pitt, England's Prime Minister in the Napoleonic Wars, called the French Revolution armed opinion. In its Declaration of the Rights of Man, the French Revolution publicly proclaimed as one of the most important of these the right to express and communicate thought freely. The Constitution of the First French Republic confirmed this idea. It contained a section guaranteeing freedom of speech in the press. One of the most effective weapons of the Revolution was its handling of public relations. Every known method of word and deed was used to win public opinion: books, pamphlets, newspapers, the stage, satire, hairdos, military insignia, and cockades. Even clothes became symbols of ideas. Partisans of the revolution threw away powdered wigs and knee breeches because they symbolized the old regime. They declared their sympathy with the new era by wearing their own hair and long trousers. To this day they remain part of Western man's costume. A step of consequence in public relations history was taken in 1792 when the National Assembly created the first propaganda ministry in history. A section of the Ministry of the Interior, it was called the Bureau d'Esprit, or Bureau of the Spirit. Large sums were appropriated for the work of the Bureau. France was flooded with propaganda. The Bureau subsidized editors and sent propagandists to various parts of the country to win public support for the revolution. Of all the leaders who arose out of the French Revolution, no one understood the art of improving his public relations better than Napoleon Bonaparte. His speeches to the soldiers were designed to arouse enthusiasm and loyalty when he invaded Egypt, reminding his soldiers under the pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you. He installed a printing press in Cairo and launched a newspaper, the Courier of Egypt, for purposes of improving his relations with the public. When he became master of France as first consul, then as emperor, Bonaparte exercised a monopoly of the press. He transferred the official propaganda department, the Bureau d'Esprit, to the Ministry of Police. From now on, the French press received its directives from the Minister of Police, Fouché. Napoleon had his own official journal, the Moniteur, distributed to the armies. To ensure that the troops would accept the emperor's point of view on matters of national policy, Napoleon's editorials were read to them. The emperor also employed other devices for influencing public opinion, including bulletins, proclamations, parades, and censorship. Napoleon was his own public relations man, using words and overt actions to win public opinion to his side. An American author, Robert B. Holtman, recently wrote a book, Napoleonic Propaganda, on Napoleon's propaganda techniques. He quotes the emperor as saying that what is truly vicious is not propaganda but a monopoly of it. While Napoleon was flooding Europe with his propaganda, his enemies used counter-propaganda. In England, the poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge, author of The Ancient Mariner, edited the Post, anti-Bonapartist newspaper, and in Germany the Rheinischer Merkur carried on propaganda against Napoleon. By the time Napoleon was in exile on St. Helena and his empire had been replaced by the Holy Alliance, the impact of public opinion in the early 19th century was aptly characterized by the British statesman George Canning. Summarizing the role of opinion in the events of the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, Canning said, "It was a power more tremendous than was perhaps ever yet brought into action in the history of mankind." Out of the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution of the early 19th century arose modern social theories whose propaganda in the 20th century had a great impact on society. Socialist, communist, and collectivist theories of one kind or another had been propagated in Greece by Plato, in the Middle Ages and the Reformation by religious groups. But modern socialism arose during the French Revolution. Subsequently, French thinkers and some English businessmen sought to win public opinion to the cause of early theories of socialism. At the outbreak of the Revolution of 1848 in Europe, socialism found modern exponents in Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Their Communist Manifesto influenced greatly the development of modern history, and, in order to combat communism, the public relations techniques of the Communist Party should receive the careful study of all those interested in preserving democracy. By the middle of the 19th century, Count Bismarck, busy building Germany, employed the techniques of public relations as he needed them. He was no respecter of public opinion. He used the techniques available to him for his own purposes. Under his direction, the Prussian government set up a literary bureau, which financed propaganda designed to prepare the public for war against Denmark, Austria, and France. Bismarck's aide in this activity was Moritz Busch, who gave the propaganda line to the German press. The Prussian government published an official propaganda journal, the Norddeutsche Allgemeine Zeitung. During the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, Moritz Busch accompanied the German armies into France, and during the occupation of that country, he directed Le Nouveliste in Versailles, Prussia's official propaganda organ on French soil. After peace came, Bismarck created a press bureau in Germany's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This bureau reinforced the propaganda work of the literary bureau. German and foreign journalists were subsidized to secure favorable opinion for Germany. In those years, propaganda played a key role in France, too. Louis Napoleon, the great Napoleon's nephew, was adept in winning public opinion. Efforts in that direction helped him to become president of the Second French Republic, then Emperor of France as Napoleon III. By this time, the Western world was being profoundly changed by the Industrial Revolution. The rise of modern science, invention, and technology, the development of new means of communication, the spread of democracy and literacy, all these advances gave public opinion and public relations an importance they had never before known.